Germany after World War I resembled a broken car. When it seemed that things could not get worse, the communists took the stage with tools ready to fix the country. However, everyone feared that they would turn her into a Soviet tank. In other words, if Germany had become communist instead of nationalist after the war, it would likely have become an ally of the Soviet Union. Considering how these countries performed in World War II, one might wonder if they could conquer the world and establish communism. One of the scenarios I consider for turning Germany into a communist country is that the Spartacus League could seize power, possibly with a more successful uprising in Berlin during a week in January 1919. This uprising was suppressed by the Seceks, but without them, the Spartacus League could have truly taken power. The problem with this scenario is that if the uprising had succeeded, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht would likely have influenced the new country with their ideology. Although this would lead Germany to communism, Rosa Luxemburg did not openly support Lenin and the Bolsheviks. She claimed it would be a miracle if the Bolsheviks could take control of Germany, as they were extremely incompetent. We cannot know for sure how the Spartak League would have governed Germany and whether it would have cooperated with the Soviet Union, which would make the scenario less interesting. Let me suggest something more plausible and exciting for this alternative history. I also created a video about how the Bavarian Soviet Republic could have succeeded, and I already raised the issue that it was unnecessary to introduce the Chekists, so this would be a repetition. Historically, there were many communist uprisings in Germany during the German Revolution, and on the screen, you can see the most famous of them, along with how many days they lasted. As seen, on average, they lasted less than a month. For example, the Soviet Republic of USA existed for only 12 days before being incorporated into France. Let's change that. What if all these communist uprisings, along with even more, succeeded? What if everything went perfectly for the communists in Germany? Historically, there was no Communist Party in Germany until 1919, which was created shortly before the Spartacist uprising, in which it also participated. A common trait among all German communists was their anti-war stance. For example, the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany, USDP, separated from the Social Democratic Party, which at that time ruled Germany and openly supported the war. My point of historical change is related to the German strike of January 1918. The strike was caused by food shortages, fatigue from the war, and the subsequent October Revolution in Russia, which inspired the Germans to revolt and create a Marxist Germany. The strike was led by the USPD, which aimed to end the war. More than 1 million people participated in the strike at important industrial enterprises. The main problem for Imperial Germany was how the Germans dealt with the strikes. They arrested the leaders and sent them to the front, which certainly only exacerbated the situation. If the suppression of the uprising had been harsher, it could have made the Communist Party more popular, as it was noted that the Socialist Party of German Workers opposed the war, with about 1 million workers openly supporting them. This decision to send people straight to the front could quickly lead to even greater discontent, and more workers would sympathize with the communists. In the mid-1980s of the 19th century, most workers and even the German public were against the war, driven by a lack of resources, rising poverty, and the realization that they were on the losing side. Thus, I can assume that the Socialist Workers' Party and the Spartacus League would have formed the Communist Party of Germany much earlier, and would have received more support from workers seeking to end the war. The German communists were fierce opponents of the war even before it began, so their slogans peace and bread, similar to those of the Bolsheviks, would have made them popular among the working class. Especially their idea of a council of workers and collective leadership, where workers would own the factories and profits would be distributed among them, rather than between owners or shareholders. These workers could theoretically vote democratically for their leaders in an organized structure and remove them at any time. This would at least promise the people that the Communist Party had laid a solid foundation and could gain even more support. However, until Anton Stallman writes and publishes the following in the newspaper, his words will not sound like a bomb for Germany. Comrades, workers, compatriots, and soldiers at the front, I call for an end to this senseless war. Only the Kaiser and the aristocracy will benefit from her victory, but we, the simple workers and soldiers, pay the price for it. Regardless of whether Imperial Germany wins or not, we remain the losers in this system. I came straight from the front. I rebelled alongside 4 brave comrades, fought in battles on the Champagne, on the Somme, and up to the battle at Soissons. I served in the war for over 3 years, and today I deserted, realizing that it would not our compatriots and workers who would emerge victorious, but the Kaiser and the upper class. Workers, soldiers, compatriots, unite. We must put an end to the senseless war that has brought poverty and hunger to the people of Germany. But most importantly, we must punish those responsible, those who started it, and those who profit from it. I dream of a great Germany where workers and ordinary people will benefit from this system. I call on all workers to join the organized strike of the Communist Party and all soldiers at the front to rebel so they can see their families again. With this message, Stallman became a unifying force for the left socialist parties, just as the Austrian artist united the Germans. Nationalist and militarist parties emerged because the left socialist parties failed to unite and establish proper cooperation. This, as I said, would solve the problem. His message would strike Germany like a bomb and quickly spread across the country. I assume it would be published at the end of October, just in time for the Kiel Mutiny on November 3, 1918, which would turn out to be historically more successful. The Kiel Mutiny occurred because sailors were ordered to undertake an almost suicidal mission, as Germany wanted to decisively defeat the British fleet, which was crucial for German military strategy. These sailors and soldiers refused to follow orders and organized the Kiel Mutiny and Workers' Council, which later spread its message throughout Germany. It would sound like this: Dear compatriots, we are the sailors of Kiel, and we have been ordered to carry out a suicidal attack just so that His Majesty, the Kaiser, can win the war, but the real losers will be those who fought and have already died. We rejected these orders and successfully captured Kiel, establishing the Soviet Republic. You can do the same. Glory to the German Soviet Republic. Let us unite and stop the war, as well as punish those who started it. This message in this alternative history would strengthen the beliefs of ordinary workers that they need peace and that support for the German imperial family is no longer acceptable. Workers were promised control over their factories and profit, which would lead to the start of a communist revolution across Germany. Unlike our real history, two major uprisings would occur within 2 weeks, one in Kiel, the other with sailors. In this alternative history, it would have led to complete chaos. Soldiers and workers would follow the organized strike of the Communist Party of Germany. Soldiers would safely desert or surrender according to the Communist Party's instructions, while workers would seize military-industrial production. This would lead to the fall of Imperial Germany and the signing of a peace treaty a little earlier than in our reality, as the Kaiser would want to resolve internal issues and maintain his power. Of course, this would have happened before the signing of the Versailles Treaty, which would later exile him and strip him of his titles. Thus, Germany would have won the First World War. But that is not all, as I want to tell how Germany became communist, about its alliance with the Soviet Union, the subsequent division of Poland between them, and the beginning of the Second World War, immediately after the end of the Great War. Immediately after the end of the Great War, the Bremen Soviet Republic would be proclaimed. A sailor from Kiel would send a delegation and support this Soviet Republic, hoping that it would not be annexed by France. But, unfortunately for them, her existence would be short-lived, as the communists in Germany could not protect her. What soon happened is described in history books as the German November. A revolution similar to the October Revolution in Russia could have occurred in Germany. The fact is that the October Revolution actually took place in November, but it got its name because Russia used a different calendar. In Germany, an open revolution striving for communism would occur exactly 1 year after the Bolsheviks. I can imagine that the Communist Party of Germany would have strengthened its support, especially in the north, as the uprising in Hamburg could also have ended in success. Historically, this happened in 1923, that is, 5 years later. But considering the situation, I think it could have happened much earlier and would have looked similar to other successful communist uprisings. The German Empire would lack enough soldiers and resources to oppose them, as by that time the people would be weary of the Hohenzollern dynasty and its decrees. I remind you of what happened in January 1918. Around 1 million workers organized a nationwide strike, and the Kaiser ordered their leaders to be arrested and sent to the front. Now the workers would be more cautious in trusting the Kaiser, as they understood they could become pawns in his game, victims forced to fight against other workers. Thus, more workers and soldiers from World War I would support the Communist Party of Germany rather than the German Empire, meaning the empire would have fewer soldiers and workers for military production, making their defeat inevitable. This would also encourage more supporters of communism to rise up across the country. The uprising in the Ruhr would have occurred much earlier and ended in success, connecting with Bremen and Hamburg. The Munich Soviet Republic and the Wiesbaden Soviet Republic would unite into the Bavarian Soviet Republic, about which I have already made a detailed video on how they could succeed. In the chaos, all of Ireland, mostly composed of workers, would join the communist movement. The Freikorps could have seized the central government by occupying Berlin, as the German Empire would have sent them to suppress uprisings, but the Freikorps and similar nationalist groups were also dissatisfied with the Kaiser for not ending the war much earlier. They believed they could win, and in their eyes, the Kaiser started the war, and when it turned against him, he used any means to maintain power. The Freikorps also wanted to continue World War I, so their support for the Kaiser seemed absurd. Thus, they would seize power and arrest the German royal family, effectively starting a civil war between communists and nationalists. However, the Freikorps made a fatal mistake by capturing Berlin, wasting numerous resources that would have allowed the rebels to strengthen and succeed instead of suppressing the uprisings. This means that the communists would now have a stronger position, and this alternative civil war would start to resemble the civil war in Russia. I admit that I was partially inspired by events related to the communists. They realized that by capturing Berlin, they could ensure control over all of Germany, and this became their immediate goal. Considering that the communists had the support of many veterans and controlled the country's main production facilities, their army significantly outnumbered the Freikorps forces. Two sides met in the vicinity of Berlin, in the city of Potsdam, but the communists from Saxony and Thuringia bypassed it from the north, effectively surrounding the Freikorps troops. This opened the way to Berlin, and the civil war in Germany ended earlier than the civil war in Russia, leading to the liberation of German workers. Germany transformed into a series of small communist republics that united into the Councils of Workers' Republics of Germany. By that time, Germany had not yet signed the Versailles Peace Treaty, which was drafted in 1919, almost a year after the end of the war. The reaction to these events would be harsh, and the peace treaty for Germany would be significantly stricter than in our historical reality. Historically, the Entente did not punish Germany too harshly to avoid provoking it into communism, but in this case, there was no such necessity. I believe that France will try to expand its borders, possibly by establishing a protectorate over the Rhine. However, I doubt that this will come to fruition, considering the ideas of self-determination proposed by Woodrow Wilson, and I do not see the allies of France supporting this initiative. Whether you believe it or not, the Entente sought to prevent the emergence of World War II, and even World War I was called the war to end all wars. Britain would prefer that Germany retain its territories, as if France were to capture them. It would guarantee that Germany would attempt to reclaim them in the future, potentially leading to World War II, something Britain, especially America, wanted to avoid. Italy would support France's claims if they, in turn, supported Italy's demands in Dalmatia. But that would not be enough, as I assume Britain and America would have more influence on shaping the peace treaty. The creation of the League of Nations was also planned. I expect that France and Italy will be outraged, but for now they cannot change anything. France could not simply continue the war against Germany, as historically, there were also uprisings among soldiers in the French army with socialist and communist views. If France invaded a socialist country, a significant number of French soldiers might desert or switch sides, potentially leading to civil war in France. Thus, France would limit Germany in other ways, aiming to increase military operations and reduce the limit on the size of the German army, which would be acceptable on the Western Front. The peace treaty would look identical, but in the East, Poland would soon find itself in conflict with the Soviet Union, leading to the Polish-Soviet War of 1919-1921. In an alternative reality, Germany will concentrate power and fulfill its promises to the people by taking over factories and handing them to workers who will share in the profits. A system of councils will also be established. One could assume that Germany would have less competent rulers, as they would be chosen for ideological loyalty rather than professional skills, which would limit the country's potential. However, as I mentioned, the workers will vote for their rulers and can demand extraordinary elections at any time to remove an undesirable person from office. Germany is implementing a more advanced version of communism compared to the Soviet Union, as it will actually give power to the workers rather than establish a communist dictatorship. Stalin could become the first leader of the Soviet Republic of Germany. Historically, he was a supporter and ally of the Soviet Union, and in 1923 he even met with Lenin. In this alternative timeline, such a meeting could have happened much earlier. The Social Democratic Party of Germany, SPD, started the war, while the communists opposed it. Some key SPD leaders may be condemned and sent to prison for instigating the war, but likely there will be no brutal murders or political instability. Simply put, the German communists in this alternative timeline are anti-war, and it is this position that brought them to power. I expect that Germany will not face the same problems as the Weimar Republic immediately after its establishment, as the Germans will increase trade with the Soviet Union and may be somewhat wealthier than the Weimar Republic, which at that time was unpopular and ineffective. Thus, there will be no hyperinflation, but the intensifying military operations in France will definitely affect Germany's economy, as profits will go to the workers. The central government will be forced to increase taxes on these incomes to pay France and maintain the functioning of the state. Nevertheless, the workers will likely see an improvement in their standard of living, while the upper class will lose their assets but will not face repression or imprisonment. Most of them will probably move south to Austria or Switzerland, taking their wealth and property with them. This will not be considered a brain drain, as it mainly involves members of the aristocracy seeking to start businesses and maintain their standard of living in other countries. Lenin may order the German Soviet republics to arrest these people, but the Germans will refuse and release them. This will demonstrate to the world, especially to the councils, that Germany is not a puppet of the Soviet Union, but an equal partner. Nevertheless, I expect that everything in Germany will return to normal, and without the rise of ultranationalists, there will never be a brain drain. This means that Albert Einstein will have no reason to leave Germany and move to the United States, so he will stay with many others, great German scientists under the Council of the Republic. I can assume that Albert Einstein could have been elected ruler for a few months or even a year. Einstein considered himself a pacifist and socialist, which perfectly aligned with the ideals of the German Communist Party, focused on anti-war and socialism. However, Einstein was Jewish, and this could have made him less popular at a time when almost all of Europe was openly displaying anti-Semitism, which could also pertain to this new communist Germany. Regardless of whether he becomes a ruler for even one term or not, it doesn't change the overall picture. But I think it's an interesting fact. As for France and Italy, their political course will differ. Historically, Italians turned to ultranationalism as they felt betrayed by their former allies, France and Great Britain, who did not fulfill promises of land transfer. This is only the surface level of the problem, and most of my surroundings believe that Italy would still have followed the path of ultranationalism even if the Dolomita Party had come to power. The rise of ultranationalism in Italy was caused by the country's very weak economy, and after World War I, Italy found itself in a dire financial situation. The Italian economy had effectively stagnated for 10 years, while the economies of other European countries were rapidly growing. By the end of the war, about 2 million Italians, most of whom were veterans, found themselves unemployed. Italian factories produced military goods, and when the war ended, these enterprises were forced to close, leading to even greater discontent and rising unemployment. Socialists in Italy began to gain popularity and could form a government, making nationalism increasingly appealing, promising to solve all these problems. It is important to remember that socialists were also becoming more popular in France. In France, as in Italy, socialist strikes occurred at the end of 1918 and the beginning of 1919. Considering the presence of communists in Germany, the French observed as ultranationalists in Italy suppressed socialist uprisings and restored order. This led to thoughts that France would soon adopt ultranationalist ideology. The French saw that their army consisted of people with socialist views, which could pose a threat to the country. Moreover, France was economically exhausted after the war, especially compared to the United States and Britain. Moreover, the French felt deceived in their interests. They wanted the Rhine to become their protectorate, but their former allies did not allow this. Italy became France's only true ally, and both countries promised to work together and stand firm against communism, realizing that Germany might soon. Austria seeks to maintain influence over its territories, and the creation of new protocols similar to the existing ones will happen much sooner. These protocols will cover Italy, France, Austria, and Hungary. Austria will become a key member of the alliance, as the exit of the Austrians will lead to Hungary's isolation. And at the beginning of 1919, there was a real possibility of Austria joining Germany. This was related to the fact that at that time, Austria was governed by the Social Democratic Party, which strongly sympathized with the Communist Party of Germany and sought to unite with it. After the war, Austria was in a devastated state. Its industry was in Czechoslovakia, agriculture in Hungary, and access to the sea was controlled by Yugoslavia. Therefore, historically, Austria and the Social Democratic Party sought to join Germany to improve the standard of living. France and Italy will try to prevent this, but the new alliance will solve many problems for Austria, offering it an attractive alternative. Thus, Austria and Hungary will gain access to Italian sea routes, and Austria will be able to trade with allies, improving its internal situation and stability. Finally, Italy will be able to invest in Austrian industry, which will practically solve all the problems that prompted Austria to seek unification with Germany. This will allow Austrians to resolve their issues without losing independence. Nevertheless, in Austria itself, there will be supporters of unification with Germany who will organize demonstrations. I do not expect France and Italy to immediately become ultra-nationalistic after the Great War, but they will begin to move in that direction and may become fully nationalistic by 1922. Which is about 4 years after the war ends. In this scenario, the year is still 1919, and strangely the world will become even more chaotic. The Polish-Soviet War will still happen, and will unfold similarly throughout the year until the Soviet Union seeks help from Germany before its advance on Warsaw. German communists, being pacifists, and against any form of war, will see in this conflict a necessity to strengthen their nation. This may cause France to think twice before attacking them, and therefore, an aggressive strategy will become the best defense for the Germans. They will want to ensure the safety of their new Soviet republic, their values, and independence, possibly deciding to enter the war on the side of the Soviets. Their goal is not to restore imperial borders, as the German communists are against the German Empire, but they will strive to liberate Polish workers, a cause popularized by Rosa Luxemburg, of Polish origin, who will not be destroyed during the Spartacus uprising. An outstanding member of the German Communist Party understood that given Germany's limited army, the best solution would be to capture part of Poland, liberate Polish workers, strengthen their position, and ultimately reclaim Alsace, which had declared itself a Soviet republic but was suppressed by the French. The war would seem like an easy victory for Germany, as the Soviet Union was approaching the conflict and Poland had just become an independent country. Why not take advantage of this opportunity? It should be noted that Germany effectively controls the Polish corridor and maintains the borders established after World War I in the East. This is related to the fact that in the historical context, the Versailles Treaty did not immediately transfer these lands to Poland, but only gave parts of East Prussia and Upper Silesia. The remaining territories were to go through a plebiscite, which, according to our history, took place and Poland expanded. This happened during the Greater Poland Uprising from December 27, 1918 to 1919. Poland raised a rebellion and secured most of its conquests, which happened at the end of December and lasted 6 months, while Germany became communist in November 1918. This occurred before the final establishment of borders with Poland. It is important to mention that the Polish-Soviet War will begin much earlier because Germany will also become communist, prompting the Soviet Union to act, hoping for Germany's support. Another aspect worth discussing is the eastern borders, but I will talk about them later in the video. I assume that immediately after the Great War, Germany will lose territories in the west, but in the east it will take much longer, as France, Britain, and the United States advocate for the creation of an independent Polish state. The fact is that Poland will be surrounded by two hostile states, and their independence will immediately be called into question. As I mentioned in my previous video, Germany will become pacifist, but they will realize that they must take up arms and join the Soviet offensive. If they do not do this, Germany will weaken and France will strengthen, leading to a future attack by the French on Germany to overthrow the communist regime. German politicians and workers will agree that the best defense is an attack, and Germany will expand, hoping this will help it resist France and the other allies. At that time, Poland did not control too much territory, as at the beginning of the Polish-Soviet War, it did not yet have the German lands it later acquired during the war in the aforementioned Greater Poland Uprising. This time, the Soviet Union will strike Poland as quickly as possible, meaning Poland will not be able to allocate 100,000 soldiers and armed workers for the Greater Poland Uprising, as it will have to fight the Soviet Union. This opens up opportunities for Germany. It is easy to consolidate power, and Rosa Luxemburg will play a key role in securing support in Poland, as she is of Polish descent. Germans will not need to seek broad support, but they will need to confuse the people. Later, when the Polish pianist Ignacy Paderewski gives a speech in Poland, the people will not respond as enthusiastically to his calls. The Polish-Soviet War will begin a few months earlier, and it can be expected that the Soviet Union will initially show weakness. Perhaps Poland will also fail to succeed and reach Kiev before being pushed back. Dent will demand that Germany return territories to Poland, but the Germans will halt negotiations as they want a referendum to take place first. In the previous episode, I mentioned that France would not be able to strike Germany to force it to submit, as a significant part of the French army consists of communists and socialists, which would lead to a civil war in France if they decided to attack Germany. Another reason why France cannot make Germany act as it wishes is that the United Kingdom and the United States have largely completed their military actions. Their soldiers have returned home and will not be inclined to support the start of a new war with Germany. This means that France will have to act alone without its allies, but due to the political beliefs of their soldiers, they will be paralyzed from within. It is also worth mentioning the Spanish flu, which is rarely mentioned but is significant to this situation. The Spanish flu lasted only 2 years but affected 500 million people, of whom about 10% died, making it one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. In the first waves of the Spanish flu, mainly Western countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and France were affected, and then it spread to other countries, including China. Thus, France will be unable to take action due to an unhappy army and lack of support from allies except for Italy, which will offer diplomatic support. Additionally, France cannot attack Germany due to a continuing dangerous viral epidemic. Germany will know and realize that it can strengthen its positions with impunity, preparing for an inevitable strike from France, which wants to rid itself of the communists in power. The Polish-Soviet War is likely to expand and encompass the Baltic region, including not only Lithuania, but also Estonia. Lithuanians may consider switching sides and cooperating with the communists, as the Soviet Union promises Lithuania that if they join peacefully, their territory will significantly expand, but they will become a Soviet satellite. I cannot say whether the Lithuanians will accept this proposal or not, so for the purposes of this video, let's assume they agree. Remember that this should not be taken too seriously, as I prioritize entertainment over realism. For Lithuania, this almost happened in our history, when the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic was established. In 1918, the Lithuanian Socialist Republic was formed under the leadership of Lithuanian communist and revolutionary Mikas Mikishas Kapsus. During the Soviet-Lithuanian War, this republic united with Belarus, often referred to as Ulbel, but was dissolved in 1920 as the Soviet Union won the war against Lithuania. If we consider the Soviet-Lithuanian War, we can see that historically, 10,000 Germans aided Lithuania, but in this alternative history, this will not happen. Considering the size of the troops and the possibility that Germany might support the Soviet Union from the other side, Lithuania would have no chance of survival, as Germany would become an ally of the Soviet Union at that time. This means that the Socialist Soviet Republic of Lithuania and Belarus will survive and be integrated into the Soviet Union. This trend will continue in the Baltic countries, as in our history Germany remained in the Baltics, and the Soviet Union, acting against communism, will not play such a role in this situation. The war for independence may turn out to be a complete failure. Historically, Germany sent about half of its soldiers to support the Lithuanian Legion, but this time, it will not happen, and Germany is likely to switch sides, supporting the Bolsheviks. Thus, the peasant and workers' army of Lithuania, with the support of Poland and Estonia, will find itself in a very disadvantageous position. France and Britain only provided naval support, while the British fleet was deployed in the region as a deterrent, but this will not stop Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany does not have to intervene directly for the Soviet Union to achieve victory, but their presence and support for the Soviet side will likely change the course of events. For example, German volunteers in the Baltic countries could assist the Soviet Union instead of supporting the Baltic states, which, in my opinion, would be enough to ensure complete victory over all these states. The Baltic Germans played a key role in the Baltic states' war against the Soviet Union. Without their support, and if Germany were to join the enemy, it can be assumed that all the Baltic countries would inevitably fall. Thus, although Poland could achieve some successes at the beginning of the war, after the Baltic issue is resolved, the main part of the Soviet army will be able to head towards Poland and ultimately begin their retreat. Germany will be tasked with defending the border against Poland, as well as against France and Belgium, in case of their attack. Germany's involvement in the war will not be aimed at a direct attack on Poland, but rather at deploying troops along the border, distracting necessary human resources and material from the Polish side, allowing Soviet forces to advance more quickly. Under such conditions, repeating the miracle on the Vistula will be difficult due to the vast number of Soviet forces and German volunteers, who will likely shift the balance of power in favor of the communists. The same can be said about the civil war in Finland in 1918, when the German Empire historically sent 14,000 soldiers to participate. This time, as in the Baltic states, it will not happen. Even these Germans could switch sides and hate the communists. I can't say if I'm being optimistic or if the German soldiers would be a decisive factor, but I want to create an exciting scenario and distract myself a bit from realism. Keep in mind that my primary task is entertainment, not strict adherence to facts, as this will make the series more engaging. The civil war in Finland will be won by the Finnish rats, and this is not so unbelievable, as it could have happened this way in reality. According to the script, German soldiers are absent to help White Finland, and at best, they switch sides to the Bolsheviks. Red Finland, as it was commonly called during the Civil War, controlled all major cities, including the capital Helsinki, as well as several large cities like Turku, Pori, Tampere, and Varala.